Yes. Yo. The chrome snake with the highlight. The last one. Shout out to the hot redhead. Professor, continue the motherfucking lecture.
First of all, English already had rules. It has them now, and not just these Blackboard things. So, for example, imagine our articles. There's the and there's a. So you talk about, well, I went to the party that I had been invited to, and, well, the party means that you had already brought it up before. And so this is the party that we talked about. If you say, well, I saw a cat, well, then you're bringing the cat onto the scene. It's a cat that you hadn't seen before. You don't know the cat. If you say, I saw a cat, presumably it's not your cat. It's a brand new cat. So the is something that was already mentioned, and a is something which is new. Now, you may not have even thought about that, but it's intuitive. But if that's the rule, then how come if you know a couple, one of them's name is Fred, and one of them's name is Louisa, and she happens to be Portuguese. And so you have barbecues with Fred and Louisa. And then one day, you're at your house with your spouse, and you're talking about Fred. And one of you says, well, Fred seems to know a few words of Portuguese. And then you say to your spouse, well, of course, he married a Portuguese woman. Well, wait a minute. Why do you say a Portuguese woman if both of you have known Louisa for years? Now, there are reasons for that, but none of us would think of it. That just shows that English is complicated. Or, for example, a foreign person asked me not long ago whether you could say fruits, because she was in the supermarket, and she said, well, there were a lot of vegetables and a lot of fruits. And I said, no, not quite. You want to say there were a lot of vegetables and a lot of fruit. Think about it, that's better. Now, you wouldn't say there were a lot of vegetable and fruits, a lot of vegetables and a lot of fruit. And then she said, well, what about fruits? And I said, well, you could say that, but it marks you as a foreigner. I said it very nicely. And then she said, but I saw somebody on TV talking about the fruits of their labors. And I said, well, yeah, but in other words, English is complicated. It has rules. But Loth and Murray decided that, no, we didn't have enough rules. Now, why did they think that? Well, one illusion that they had, which was particularly common in their day, was that Latin and Greek are the best languages. These were people who were still being educated in that classical tradition. And Latin and Greek have what you could, in a sloppy way, call conjugated nouns. That is, that the nouns have these long lists of case endings. So, of the boy, to the boy uses an object, the boy used in the ablative, etc., etc. So, not only do you have the hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, hablais, hablan verb conjugations that we may be familiar with from Spanish, but the nouns are equally complicated. So, because English is a kind of a naked language in that way, we don't have much of that, there was always a sense that somehow Latin and Greek were better, that they were more developed, and that English represented some kind of decay. Now, as we've already seen in this course, and we will continue to see, languages without endings can be very complicated. If Cantonese Chinese has 9 different tones, well, that kind of compensates for Latin and its good old endings. So languages can be complicated in many ways. Think of the fruit and the fruits. Foreigners have trouble with things like that. But Loth and Murray had no way of knowing that. The study of what we would call exotic languages was much less advanced at the time. And what they knew was that there was Latin, there was Greek, there was English, and there was some other stuff that was kind of like English. And Latin and Greek were up top. So as a result, they came up with one rule which bedevils us today. And that is the Billy and me went to the store rule. The idea is that we're supposed to say, Billy and I went to the store, because me is not a subject. And we're told this over and over again. Whenever I do that in public, I hear about it over email. It's considered just this terrible language. Well, actually, that rule makes no sense. And I don't mean that I disapprove of it. It's not politics. It's not that I've got some perky little objection and I want to see if it's going to float. It literally makes no sense. Now, Loth and Murray thought that that was the way English should be, although it never has been, because that's the way it would be in Latin. Latin happens to be very persnickety about having subject pronouns in subject position. That's a nice thing about Latin. Latin's not persnickety about other things. English is persnickety about certain things, and so on. Languages vary. Latin happens to have a fetish about that. But English never has. And so, for example, we're not alone. In French, if you want to say Billy or William and me went to the store, then you say Guillaume et moi, William and me, sommes allés au magasin. That's how you would say it. You would never say Guillaume et je, Billy and I, sommes allés au magasin. It's all wrong. You can take French for 10 minutes and feel that that sentence is wrong. Yet the French are under no impression that their language is slovenly or doesn't have any rules. It's perfect French. Nobody in France gets hit on the back of the head for saying the equivalent of Billy and me went to the store. But for some reason in English, it's considered a major social gaffe. Well, that doesn't really make any sense at all. And if you think about it, this idea that you have to use the subject pronoun in subject position is one that you couldn't consistently observe without basically dying alone because you were found to be rather peculiar. And so, for example, imagine if somebody says, "Who did that?" And you know that it was two people on the other side of the room, and you point to them. What you say is, "Who did that?" You say, "Them." Now, them is not subject form. You can't say them did that. You're supposed to say they did that. But never would you say they. That sounds ridiculous. If it was you and someone else who did it, who did that? We. No, us. Even though you wouldn't say us did it.